Hello, and welcome to Culture Conversations, the podcast where we explore the people side of work. I'm your host, Megan Robinson. For years, I've found myself deep in discussions about workplace engagement with industry experts. Now I get to share this wisdom with all leaders, new and experienced, on their journeys to build cultures that maximize potential. We spend so much of our lives at work. Let's make it a place where our teams can grow and succeed. Hello and welcome to Culture Conversations. My name is Megan Robinson and I am so excited for my guest today. Carlee Wolfe is absolutely amazing. And from our very first conversation, we dove in deep. We were getting very strategic, very insightful, and she is just a wealth of information. And so as we are creating this content today and this topic, I cannot be more excited about how topical it is, how much we've been having multiple conversations in both of our networks about waiting for a seat at the table, because so many times HR is left wanting one. They're waiting for their invitation, or they keep trying to get that seat at the table, wanting to be taken seriously and having the conversations with C-suite, and it's just not working out. So we're going to dive into what's going on around this area, why this keeps happening, and what we can really do about it. Carlee Wolfe is a talented and organizational effectiveness leader, focusing on helping organizations navigate the future of work. As a leader of integrated talent management and organizational effectiveness at Hyatt Hotels Corporation, she oversees global strategies spanning talent acquisition, leadership development, performance management, and colleague insights. As a recognized voice in the HR community, Carlee speaks on leadership, workforce transformation, and the responsible use of AI in people practices. Beyond her corporate role, she serves on the City of the Baltimore Workforce Development Board, PERSCOLAs, and the Complete Player Charity. And if that wasn't enough, she still coaches city volleyball for USA Volleyball. She's passionate about creating opportunities for people, organizations, and communities to thrive, and she turns that passion into action. Thank you for joining me, Carlee.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited. So we were talking before this session and just before we started recording too, this waiting for this invite, the seat at the table problem. Why do you think that this has been going on for decades, and why is it not going away?
Yeah. Okay, also we have to like reference I was smiling in the intro because you said it's a very topical conversation. We were laughing about well, just before we came on, and I used that term as well, and I had to like Google and check it. So I love that it is still topical. It has been a topical. We're gonna like overuse it because I never used it out of my own mouth until today, but I've heard it. But we're gonna use it a bunch. But it's always been topical. It is happening now, but I think largely just because there's just a lot going on in the world of AI and how workforce is changing in the workplace. And perhaps there's like an AI component to it, but then previous to that, I mean, we just had a lot happening in work and in the world. But I think that one is an HR practice. I find a lot of leaders are asking this question because that's where we want to be able to influence. And so that's important. I look at it maybe as more of the how am I in service to the organization and where we're headed. And then I think right now, because there's so much change happening in and through technology, you're either seeing people, business leaders out, or vendors or partners or creators out in front talking about changing work, and HR maybe questionably if they're involved in that, like literally being brought
Are they
up
part
in
of the
dialogue,
conversation?
right? Or you have even overtly conversation happening of like, hey, is this CTO taking over HR, right? Like that sort of a question, which by the way, we've seen before. And I think just because we're all figuring it out, where do I, as an HR leader, sit in the conversation and how can I influence as we're all figuring it out? So I think there's just like the combination of the things that are going on of why it feels like it's coming to the surface more often.
Well, it sounds like HR has always kind of been, I'm going to say, a little threatened in general because they haven't had that seat at the table. But right now, with other aspects, you said CTOs have been taking over, or I'll even say finance has taken over or kind of overseen HR for a long time. Why is it topical now? Because this is not a new conversation, to your point.
Yeah, I think There's a lot of identity questions happening right now. People like in their literal careers. I mean, this goes beyond even just the HR practice. I think folks in their jobs of what does the future mean for me? Where can contribute? Where can I continue to contribute? Whether that's AI's influencing some of the outcomes that I drive, or where is the economy at, and am I going to be impacted in what's happening? So I think a lot of stuff sits in between. So let's call it maybe the fear of uncertainty. And in fear of uncertainty, we start asking that question. I think also because it's everything's moving so quickly, and by the way, this depends on the organization that you sit in. We may not feel like we have our arms wrapped around what's going on, and that can feel uneasy too, and where we can influence or have conversation, making decisions or being part of the decision. So I think that's a big part of it for sure. And then like where we started, which is it's been the question of how does HR get at the table? By the way, I find this one to be it is a also a funny conversation for me in the way that it comes, and I'd be curious your thoughts, like in and out of conversation for me. In fact, there was a small HR conference here in Baltimore recently, and they were originally talking about like, is HR at the table a topic? And we were like, it's always been a topic. How do we not have that topic? And then it became really about what you and I are talking about. What's in the way? Why are we coming around on this again? So I think that I think it's just it's always been in the ether. Like, what role does HR play? Also, because some of it's back office, it feels like the weird Wizard of Oz. So maybe people actually don't want to like see what HR is doing, or it's the types of transformation that are happening now, which is there's just so much uncertainty, and how do we get that strategic seat? But I love the push here today because it's in the tension of um, not maybe the old question, but the new question of what role do we play in the evolution of, or in the championing of humans at work as we go through major transformation?
Yeah, there's a lot of transformation and HR, if HR doesn't have a seat at the table, what's the risk? Because I mean, I
What's
know
the,
there's lots of conversations
yeah,
happening, right? They're not at the table, so why does that even matter? Is there a reason they need to be
no,
brought in?
I love this question, and I'm gonna also give it an applicable scenario, which is that in Baltimore, we're having these conversations around can like HR, a group of HR folks play a strategic role in helping the city stay on top of the dialogue around alcohol, in this case, around workforce. So, in other words, where a bunch of people go to work and or could work. And as I've been chatting with friends in the area, I was saying, "Oh, HR, we can help." And they're like, well, what would HR do? And I'm like, what wouldn't they do? What would we not do? And they're like, no, but really, like, what about HR? And part of it's like a helpful question in that when we're collectively trying to solve something as big as like AI transformation and disruption, right? It's not to say that people aren't tackling it in my case in the city of Baltimore. It's more so it's fair to ask that question because it pushes on initiatives like ours, which is can we serve a purpose and not duplicate efforts or assume that things are not happening. But we're gonna go to the second one, which is, well, what would HR provide? And I think that it's so fascinating, like what's the risk? So why HR and then what's the risk if not? If folks aren't aware, or let me say this, HR has responsibility for the careers and the performance impact of humans in an organizations. So how are you hiring people? How are you developing them? What's a job? What does that job get paid? What benefits go with that? What's the construct around what accountability looks like? How are we all oriented to goals that drive impact and performance and what we're doing? What's the architecture? If I work in an organization, what's the architecture of all those things so that we stay like financially responsible? I mean, I can go on and on around the list. All of this to say, they are the architects of how jobs happen, which is performance outcomes in an organization. So, what's the risk? We're spending money where we don't need to. We're making decisions that have both short and long-term risk impacts. We're not investing where we can, which means that we're not supporting people in being rewarded or recognized. In other words, the emotional, behavioral drivers that get us to performance. So this is what's the risk? That we're not effective in delivering outcomes. And I think that's the whole reason that we're even in this AI conversation. We think we can do it fast, or we think and we know that we can do it faster and more effective. So that's what I think the issue, the why it's a risk, but also why should HR be at the table? So I think I love your positioning. I'm just bringing in that second component because I do think there is a wondering. And if you don't know, that's what I would share on the why.
You articulated that better than I think I've heard many, if any, other HR professionals truly articulate the value prop of what HR does. And you're able to connect it so clearly to the bottom line, to the business impacts, to the profitability, to the productivity on all of those components that you shape instead of just saying, hey, we make sure people get paid appropriately.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. That is just a tactic. That's just one of the things that you do on your to-do list. It's the responsibility that lies. But when you're able to connect it to the business outcomes from the people perspective and the people component and how that works within the organization, this is why you have a seat at the table, right? That's why I wanted to have that conversation
Yeah.
because so often it is such a soft area or a gray area for people to really understand what the value they bring so they don't have that seat. So they aren't included in those conversations because no one understands what the value is. And I think the
Yes.
branding around it is where we're seeing that struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And I think you said something there that also is differentiated, which is if we're just if use that example, if we're just there to make sure people are get paid on time. By the way, highly important. I'd like to get paid on time. However, to your point, like this is the part that I'd say, well, like why wouldn't we automate that or have something like that can oversee that, right? Like absolutely. This is where I actually agree. I say sure, those are parts of AI or parts of AI. Those are parts of HR that should evolve. Like, why wouldn't we? But to the maybe I'll use that term of like the architecting of how performance happens. I think takes it to that level of architecting infers systems, it infers connectivity, it infers a long-term and short-term view. And with that, that is the seat. That's the power of the role. And so when organization is saying, hey, we want to increase our revenue or we want to add a new product line, the HR role is okay, how do we then architect the delivery of that through the people, or now in our new world, our people and our agents and our tools. And that becomes the strategic lens that can be provided, should be provided, and also continues to enable that strategy to happen for the most effective way for that company in a culture that matters for that company and in a way that they're also still following through on their commitments to, for example, their customers.
This is bringing up something else because I love this word architecting. And it's so intentional. It is incredibly strategic. And
Yes.
do you think that it's that HR hasn't risen to that level of strategy? Or is there another gap there? Because I was reflecting on a different conversation that I had with we were looking at what HR looked like 20, 30 years ago, 40 years
Hmm.
ago. And especially with unions, and this was someone that had worked with different labor forces, they were truly that conduit of communication. They were truly the person that represented an entire force and um, group. I mean, you always represent a group of people, but without having kind of that advocate or that name around it, it was hard to architect something with that. And as we've gotten more and more um, dis, I can't think the right word, separate out, we've been really struggling to wrap our arms around the people and have that true communication or that true voice when the people don't have that consistent aspect of it. So the fact that you're looking at that delivery aspect of the architect or really what the people component looks like, I think is incredibly strong.
Yeah. I mean, and you're I think the question around has it always been there or has it evolved? I mean, I think in general, we're in a place where I think we can like use the phrase what got us here won't get us there. And I think that stems across all roles and how we think about things. And so if I'm the CEO, the CMO, the CFO, fill in the blank, right? Perhaps they're thinking about, okay, what got me here won't get me there. How do I evolve my team? But they may or may not thinking about what got HR here won't get them there. And perhaps there's like an unintended assumption of like, okay, well, yeah, that HR stuff, we could do that. And by the way, maybe some of that stuff we could do or outsource. This is kind of like what we're chatting
Yeah.
about. Um, but I think what is being lost is I'm going to be a huge advocate for the craft because I love what I do and I love everyone, all of us that work in HR is to one, be our advocates on what the new architect is, and two, be in that conversation with peers. And at that level, I'm talking about C-suite, but I think it shakes
Yeah.
all the way down to all of our levels, which is your peers transforming and shifting? how do you do that together? Because I think there's power in community and connection, but also know your new positioning, which is to help then advocate and communicate and educate others on what your new evolved tweaked remit is. But to your bigger question of like the architect role of HR, I think we've just changed over the years and it's looked different. Of course, if we were to rewind the clock and we're be like back to, and I don't know if I was my favorite term of what HR used to be was like personnel, where like people used to just go and it was like, I don't know, maybe the principal's office or maybe some of the
Yeah.
filings. At the time, that probably was the architecting role because you still needed someone to be an advocate at that time, maybe advocate for like how people spoke with to one another, ensuring you got paid on time because by the way, the systems didn't work, you had to like run stuff down the hall. Like that was architecting, and that's
Mhm.
okay. But now it just looks different because our world is different and the roles are more complex. But I think what we're talking about here is what got us here won't get us there, but that doesn't mean that we can't pay homage to the past. And I'll just draw it two little architect. Oh no, go ahead.
No, I love this architecting and almost how what does it look like in the future as you look at how do you architect the people side of work. My contrarian question is why do you need HR to do that? And is that starting to dissipate into the different departments and teams and responsibilities where they're really doing the architect and they may not be as apt to do it as HR is, but that's where I almost starting to see that
Yeah.
trend and the responsibility fall.
I think it's two things. Like one, I think there's always been a tension of like what sits in an HR camp and what could be we'll call like sort of open to the application of where work happens. And I think today or yesterday or in the future that conversation will continue. And I think the things that influence that are industry, regulations, employment, or literal like local law, where the organization is at in their growth journey, nonprofit, for profit. Like there's a ton of stuff that influences that part of it. Like for example, if I work in the government, the whole tension of what's autonomy to local versus what is constructed at an organizational level is going to look much differently than a startup in a tech industry. So I think there's that, and that will always exist. But also, I think that's part of the architecture role. I work in this organization. This is where we can push enable, support, etc. And so I think using that to continue to move us forward, where are people's organizations in AI transformation? One, what role do you want to play? What role can that be executed, supported, integrated at the local level? Like, for example, let's talk about like culture, right? There's big company decisions that we make that influence culture, such as the famous and wonderful topic of like return to office. But then there's things that happen locally that the manager owns and looks at, which is how do I treat people every single day? And so, like, that's maybe an abstract example, but it's a very real one. And I think the same goes for AI, which is, in fact, even more so what are the things that can sit at the center? I think these are these intentional decisions around tool accessibility, investment in skill development, just to name those two, versus the localization of how do I use the tool that I've been provided and how do I use the skills that I have or skill development that I've given access to, and then how do I work with the people around me to apply and continue to learn more. So I think that that's a way to look at it. But just as we've evolved in the past, I think it's continuing to evolve in the future.
What I love about that evolution with it, and it's different than other departments or teams, right? With marketing, you know it sits in marketing. It might be a little bit different from company to company or industry to industry, but it is very clear cut on what that looks like. What you hit on for me with this is you have to architect HR differently for every single organization. And if you're stepping into it, you have to advocate or to change or to make those expectations and boundaries because it is not implied in any way, shape, or form. And if you are not the one that is advocating for it or clarifying it or setting those expectations or aligning to it, then you're getting whatever's thrown at you by default. And I think that's where I see a lot of that gap or that push-pull for most people is because they haven't made that intentionality, they haven't staked it out, they haven't asked the question, what role do I want to play in this? Like you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yeah, yes, and I also think that as you're talking, something that just like inspired me was, and perhaps one of the challenges that is a part of the why am I not seen at the table is that I actually hope most of what I do is not seen by people. Like I don't need people touching work and they're like, did Carlee Wolfe do this? Okay, okay, HR. Like I actually hope that a lot of stuff that happens, the way that they feel it is that it's a great place to work, that their manager supports them, that they feel like they're getting, paid and in a within market, that their organization makes decisions that has them in mind, like these sort of things. So it's almost interesting in that we talk about the seat at the table, but the execution or the impact like really becomes from a behind the scenes. Like it's the we want the leaders to be good leaders and look good. Like it's not that we need to be out front. So one, I'm actually just sort of naming like kind of an interesting, for at least for myself as I reflect, like an interesting, maybe this is part of why. Um, but also maybe opportunity for people to think and answer your question about like what is architecting in the future? Like what are you touching or not touching? Because I don't think what we're talking about is control. What we're talking about is literally like the enabling and supportive pieces that HR delivers and thinking intentionally about that, rewiring where needed, which probably is in many places, and still ensuring like you're the quiet architect. It's like the app that we all touch. Like it should just work. We don't need to know all the we don't I don't know who built anything on my phone, but it works and it works well. And I think that that's kind of HR.
I love the app analogy. I'll also say if you ask someone to draw a picture of a bicycle, how could you like actually sit down, draw a picture of a bicycle, and see how much of that you could put it together on how it actually works? We all know how a bicycle works. We've
Mm.
all written one, but we don't
Yeah.
really stop to think of what that looks like or how we actually physically map it out. Um,
Yes.
but I love this challenge of what you own, what that ownership looks like, or what you, I'll say influence. It's ultimate leadership, right? This
Mhm.
HR is truly having that influence across everything. But the challenge that I see is that then you don't actually have the visibility. You may have the
Yep.
influence for it, but then the visibility and the value and reinforcing that becomes very hard because it's messy. It's someone else's, the leaders did that, the leaders did that, or the organization upheld this. And even though you had that influence through it, it doesn't always track back as clearly to the metrics that you are in control of or actually taking control for some of it.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And I think it works both ways too, right? And that's like that interesting shared ownership of the organization's success. And it's a fascinating one. And I think and it's also, I don't know if we're overusing this architecture metaphor or not, but I one thing maybe this is like we like conclude if we need to after this, but I was thinking about as we're going through this and what you're bringing up. So I'm originally from Chicago, Hyatt's headquartered in Chicago, and if you ever visit the city or live there or been there and you haven't, everyone needs to do the architecture tour. It's on the river. You get to see and visit all the buildings because
Absolutely.
Chicago's an architecture city. I take a lot of pride in how those things have been constructed. And actually, Hyatt's located in one of the marquee buildings in that tour, which is they call it an architectural. Well, I don't know the official way of which every boat would phrase that, but an architectural and a design like feat that was like it's very well known for the work that's been done there. And I almost see it very similarly. So the very short of it is that the building was built on land that doesn't have as much of a foundation that you can go into. And so one of the solves was and there's a number of reasons why, take the architecture, you'll get the details or Google it. But there are these tanks at the top of the building called, I think they're literally called water sludge barrels. And so they keep the building from, the layman's terms, tipping over, right? So when there's wind, it helps balance the building. So normally that would help be supported much deeper in the ground. Meanwhile, they want it to also look very good. And so this is where architecture, how does or excuse me, the design, like the look and feel of this building on the corner of where the rivers convene, and then the architecture of like how do you make that happen? And so if HR is the architecture to say metaphorically AI, which is like we have this issue in the way of actually architecting the design that you have, in other words, AI to disrupt work, right? You're not going to find the water barrel sludge at the top. Although now I'm like going through this, I'm like, I don't want HR to be slodgy, but like metaphorically, right? This is why they have the experience, right? They've built buildings before. We know how to do things. So then also keep the design, keep the culture, keep the strategy, keep the outcomes, keep it, what's the brand facing to the customer? This is the marriage. And this is the metaphorical marriage of which the city of Chicago is happy to share all the time on that river. And so why is that also important? Because that's a newer building that wouldn't have been able to be accomplished years ago. And if you use old thinking, old architecture, one, you don't have a building that tall. In other words, what are your results and your performance? And two, you don't have something that looks as good. And I think this is the overextension of the metaphor, but also quite literally, like, why does HR need that seat at the table? Because they understand, they have the experience, they understand how can be creative, can be innovative, can still keep the design of what the organization is trying to do, and by the way, continue to achieve its results or even greater than we thought was possible.
It's going to fall down without having that strong HR piece.
I love the dramatic pause. It's gonna fall down.
It's going to fall down. Part of me is
If
like
we
the
don't
Tim
do
Gunn
this.
make it work.
So
Like
yeah,
they
so
just
I'm like,
make it work.
oh no, we missed it. No, but totally. I no, the dramatic
Yeah,
pause was amazing. But no, it's true. But I think that's the case. It's gonna fall down, or maybe, or we're gonna build it, and part of
keep
it falls down.
limited.
You're like, okay, I guess we can't make it to be 60 stories. We're gonna have to cut to 30. And who wants a 30 story? Who wants less business results when you're out there trying to take whether more market share, more impact, more impacting more communities? Like we want to deliver on the missions of which we exist.
No pressure, HR, but I do see that as truly when you are
Yeah,
the effective catalyst for something like that, and I'll say catalyst instead of architecture, you're
yeah,
able to
yeah.
achieve that. And you see organizations, I was talking to someone else, I was like, how many, Fortune 500 companies or S&P 500 were there 50 years ago? And I
Yeah.
truly look at the HR integration and how HR is being used within the organization and how they're able to advocate for the things that keep companies lasting, that continue to show the growth, that are able to reach the true full potential rather than being limited. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean that, if you built a 30-story building instead of a 60-story building, no one says, man, I really wish this could have been a 60-story building. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they're like, cool, it's 30 stories. Let's rock on. That was
Mhm.
good. It's going to be that difference between the two.
Yeah. Well, and Catalyst is key too because it's requiring the part of like I'm out there, I'm out in front, I like own something or advocating for something or doing of something. And so I also think that's important when we start this whole conversation about seat at the table. I don't think it should just be a seat that's there. I don't like I love what we do, but I just an unfulfilled space or an unutilized space is an unimpactful space. And unimpactful, yeah, I think that's right. Space, maybe not, or it's a new word for today. But meaning like I think the chair should be there, but we should be filling it with catalysts because that then is why the chair is an invite because you are moving things forward with your peers. And again, I'll say we've been talking a lot probably from this like executive or senior level, but I think it exists everywhere. What's the project that you're on of which your role is coming up with a design or an idea, be the catalyst, own the seat. Maybe that's another way of putting it. And that's where HR has the seat at the table. There's no question about the seat at the table if we're using the seat.
It's taking the opportunity, or as I always like to look at it, as the leadership moments. They are there more often than you think, and sometimes you lean into
Yes.
them and sometimes you don't. And the more you're able to lean into them at that level, with that type of vision, with that type of catalyst, with that type of architecture, that is how you claim it.
Yep. Exactly.
Well,
Exactly.
Carly, this
And
has
I
been a
think
fabulous. Oh, good.
no, I was gonna say no. I think whereas we're closing, I think just to take us out of like the metaphors or analogies or like the push, I think the question that I've been asking myself, other people ask, which is like, what do you want to be known for? What are you trying to bring? And when you think about the people that you're supporting in your organization, what is it that you want to move the needle on, the conversation that you want to influence? And again, that could be in every seat and every position that we're in. And knowing that outcome that you have in mind, I think that becomes like your personal mission statement of how you're showing up and demonstrating value and influencing and then you're, if we will, owning the seat. So I just I hope that that's helpful because I think that question also doesn't put you in only a moment in time. It evolves because I think principle or maybe principle number one is what is it that you want your seat to represent, and number two is like how does that show up for you? And I think both of those revisiting that continues to keep you relevant and your organization moving forward because that's what is important.
I love
How
that
about the
clarity.
people in that organization are moving the organization forward.
The other people are moving the organization forward that you are then
Because we're
supporting
HR. Exactly. We gotta have the people.
you gotta have the people.
We're the people
Well,
business.
I love the
Yeah.
clarity, right? So
Yes.
that's so often missed. That's so often having that vision, that clarity of what it is that you want, really want. What is it that you're really trying to impact? And being able to communicate that clearly from all aspects and all levels and all positions. Once you have that, you're then able to be consistent with it. Then you're able to align people to that. And that's what's going to give you more of that power, more of that authority, more of that clarity, and more of the buy-in, frankly, which is the other challenge that we see all the time.
Yes, exactly.
Well, incredible conversation. Thank you so much, Carlee. If you do want to connect with Carlee, we'll put her contact information in the notes for you. As you can tell, she's one of my favorite people to have these very intellectual and applicable conversations with because of your depth of experience, because of the way that you think and what you've seen in this industry. Thank you for continuing to move it forward in incredible ways, Carlee.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's always good to reflect and share. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Culture Conversations. I'm your host, Megan Robinson, founder of eLeader Experience, a professional leadership development company. Today, we shared actionable ideas to navigate the evolving workplace landscape, compete for talent, and build cultures that maximize potential. If you're looking to learn more about how to support your organization's leaders, you can learn more about our work at eleaderexperience.com. Now get out there and contribute positively to your organization's culture with your own conversations.